I'm John Parker, president of SoCal 7x24 chapter. We have our first virtual organization meeting today. First of all, I would like to welcome our two sponsors. First, Silverback Data Solutions. They provide data center services you can trust. I would like to thank our second sponsor as well, Unirise. Unirise provides your cabling solutions for all your network and data center needs.
Now let's get started with today's meeting. John Parker is our speaker, and he's going to talk about today about when and how to move to a data center colocation. John Parker, take it away.
All right, thank you, Gil. A little bit about me. For those of you that don't know, I've been in the data center industry, IT industry especially, for about 30 years now. This year I have an MBA. I've managed IT teams and data centers in 4 industries: healthcare, pharmaceuticals, banking, and now software development. I currently manage Esri's global data centers, and there are 50 some offices around the world, IT rooms. And in the past 10 years, I've coloed several data centers. I've moved colos. I've consolidated a couple of data centers. We've created hybrid data center miles. Now we spend millions a year, like a lot of companies, in the cloud as well. And professionally, I'm on the Data Center Institute Board of Directors. It's a subsidiary of AFCOM. I'm current president of the 7x24 SoCal chapter, and I've been president of several other organizations over the years. And I love speaking. I speak at local, national, and international conferences every year, and I've also speak at universities. So that's probably too much about me, so I'll get started with the meeting. So right off the bat, if this is your idea of a modular data center, then you may want to move to a colo. This is kind of ingenious, but I don't know how reliable an HA it will be. So first of all, when you do anything with your data center, whether you're building a data center, going to a colo, going to the cloud, or any of these things, it's really good to have a data center model and a strategy. The strategy is the lower level, the model is the higher level. And for these, you need to understand your business requirements, your IT requirements, your security requirements, and your budget requirements and constraints. I could talk on this one slide for over an hour, and I do it at several conferences and all where I speak at, just on creating a model and a strategy. I'll talk about a few of these a little later. So use a real estate broker and always understand your MSA and get a good MSA. By this, you need to negotiate really well, and negotiations are very, very time consuming, especially if you're down to 2 or 3 colo providers and you're making a decision. You're going to see quotes and everything from multiple ones, or you should. And you're going to have to review these with your legal teams and your contracts teams in most companies. And once again, very time consuming, and it can be very stressful as well. Also, one of the reasons I like to use a real estate broker, and I'll talk about this later as well with the broker, but it's hard when you're getting quotes from various colo providers. Their business models, their invoicing, their quoting, and always a lot of times different, and sometimes very different, to where it's hard, very hard, to compare apples to apples quotes and the services you're going to receive, and deciding based on that. And a real estate broker, or the one I've used for the 3 colos I've done, and there were different different colo providers. They've been able to, for an example, give me a spreadsheet with colo provider A, colo provider B, colo provider C, and they list out all the NRCs for me. They list out all the MRCs and other features and functions outside of that, put prices on there. And it makes it really simple for me and other management team members in the colo selection involvement to understand what we're getting. And before I started using a broker, this was really tough. This was one of the hardest things I had to do to make sure I was getting all the services and everything I needed and understood what they were telling me in these quotes and these MSAs. NRCs, once again, negotiate, negotiate, negotiate. I'm gonna just highlight a couple of things here. Power whips, PDUs, racks, and cabinets, you can really negotiate these to where many times you can get all of this free, or at least a level of it. You may not get the exact cabinet you want, you may not get the exact PD you want, but you can negotiate this to where if you're on a tight budget, you may get these services provided free. And I know nothing's for free, but believe me, it's going to be a lot cheaper still. Security and budget requirements. Like I said, I mentioned this earlier in the data center strategy. To me, the most important one is security, because when you move into a colo or the cloud or even build a new data center, if you don't know what your current and future security requirements are, those are harder to me, for me at least, to create workarounds. An easy example is, say I don't have PCI compliance right now, but if I think I may have it in the future or a customer may require it, then when I build out a colo, I may want to put a ceiling on that cage. I may want to run that cage walls all the way down to the subfloor. So these are important things when you're looking at a colo, to ask the business side, what are they looking for other customers in the future? What are their customers looking for? And budget wise, that's one of the reasons you can go to a colo, that one of the reasons I've went to a colo. I couldn't get my company to give me the $5, $10, $20 million to build new data centers, but I could give them to give me a few $100,000 a year to move things, or not everything, but some things, to a colo. So I could remain in budget. And know what your budget will cover. That's where the real estate broker comes in handy again, getting you those apples to apples comparisons. So once you do move into that colo, you're going to know what your budget is every month and what you're going to be invoiced for. Here's one I really recommend, and I don't think you always realize it until you do it. Visit at least 3 to 5 sites, colo sites, and when you do, or as Yogi Berra, the famous catcher for the Yankees back in the 60s and Aflac commercial guy, says, you can observe a lot by just watching. And by this, Yogi and I mean, when I talk with the colo providers on the phone before I go visit, to narrow it down to 5 or 10, however many I'm looking at, and then when I go to them, I can't tell you how many times it's looked different than I expected, and usually not as good. You can see how their customers interact and are working in their cages. If it's best data center practices they're using, if they have cardboard in their rooms, you can see how the security check-in is when you come to the colo for a visit, and you're a visitor, so it should be a little different and hopefully a little more stringent. And then you can walk around and you can just observe, like Yogi says. And another thing I like to do is, and so does my real estate broker, he lets each colo provider know that there are 2 or 3 other providers involved in this negotiation and quoting process. And what I like to do is I like to end each visit to a colo provider with a Q&A session. And when they tell me they have the XYZ green initiatives, or they have this much power and redundancy, I try to get all that in documented form. So they're just not blowing off steam. They can prove in writing they have these things. And one last thing, and you really want to do this when you select a provider, but I like to do it when I'm down to 2 or 3 or 4 providers, and that's do a complete walkthrough. Don't just take their nickel and dime tour, what they want to show you. If they just show you the main floor, the main hall of the data center, ask to go see their loading dock. Ask to see their NOC if they have one, their security room, everything, because you can see a lot, once again, like Yogi says, by observing. And I've seen some pretty poorly ran colos just because of this. When to consider a colo. And this is my preference of when to consider a colo, and that's how I've ended up in a few. When you're running low or you're nearly out of power, and I've been like this for like in my main data center on our campus for about the last 8 years. I get down to the bare metal of being out of power, and we end up retiring or virtualizing things, and then I can breathe again for another 6 months. And when you have a colo, you don't have to worry about that as much, or you have another place to upload some of your hardware. You may have unqualified or lack of personnel to help manage your data centers. You may have budget constraints. My budget constraints has always been an aging infrastructure with my UPS generators, all my MEP stuff. And you may have a lack of HA, high availability, and you're needing that more and more. The business is needing it, your customers are needing it, and you can go to a colo and get all that easy and sleep better at night. And also when your data center cannot meet requirements for SLAs and audits. As industries grow, as companies grow, you may not always be able to keep up with the SLA requirements, 100% uptime, or any audit requirements you may have in a legacy data center. So once again, colos are good for that. And one of the biggest ones I like, and it's why I like using the cloud as well, is for future unknown growth and support activities. It's hard to tell what your future is going to be, and there's a yogiism about that too, but I won't go into that. But it's really hard to predict the future, and when you're doing that data center strategy and that data center model, you may get a little idea of it, but there's always the unknowns that come out. Additional considerations: first right of refusal, or ROFR. I think most of you know this, but if you select a colo provider and you sign an MSA, make sure you've got first right of refusal. So that means next to or where your cage is, you can acquire that space and just build right there where you are. Extend your cage, hopefully. Here's one I like to do, and it has pros and cons, but the pros I like about it is consider a colo that's not very built out. Usually, you're going to have a lot more flexibility and negotiability with a colo that's not very built out. I've seen this several times because they need customers, and if they're not very built out, you may get the best deal because they want to get a good footprint in there. And the downside of that, of course, is, well, they may not ever get any more customers and start and cutting back on things, but that's where you have your SLAs and everything in place to help you control that. Negotiate future growth within the cage. And this is a little more than just saying, I'm going to build a cage and I need 50 racks or 50 cabinets. And so I better make it 55 cabinets or 60 cabinets so I can grow. I'm saying if I know I'm going to need a cage and it needs 50 cabinets in it, and I'm going to grow it to 60, then I'm probably going to ask for 65 cabinet space. And the reason I do that is I like to have a little work area in my cage and a little storage area in my cage. And if you're a good negotiator, or your real estate broker is a good negotiator, you can usually get that 5 or so extra cabinet space to put a table in there. And, you know, when you move hardware into it or take it out, you've got a place to work and store things. So that's one of my little secrets and tricks, and it's always worked. And I've had several other providers or customers when they're in a colo, how'd you get all that extra space? And I always tell them that. Service offerings they provide. A lot, if not most, of your colo providers now, especially the larger ones, offer some kinds of cloud services, and it makes it a lot easier if you need cloud services, and you can get it at the colo you're residing in. So that's a good one as well. Hardware installations and build outs. What tier of services do they provide? Is it only tier 1, level 1 support? Is it tier 2, level 2? Can they do installation and build outs for you? Heck, some of them I've talked with will even move your data center to a colo for you, or have companies that they're working with to do that. Excuse me. Remote hands. Do you have any requirements for remote hands? For example, I have a requirement for US citizens to go in my cage. It's a customer requirement we have. So make sure you understand if you need any remote hand requirements of the personnel going in your cage. Support levels and SLAs, most people understand that. Another one I find is not consistent is bundled hours for remote hands. That's a good negotiating platform you can use, where you can maybe get 3 to 10 hours a month free remote hands in your negotiation. And how do they charge you for those hours? I like it when it's broken down into quarter hours, because there are many times we need something, a tape removed, or just go in there and look and see what's beeping for me, and those kind of things, which are, I hate to be charged a full hour for 15 minutes worth of work, as an easy example there. One critical thing for me, and I'm an ITIL person, is incident and change management. And I can't tell you, I was interested in a few Colo providers on the last Colo selection I did 8 years ago. And I was really high on this one smaller Colo provider in Seattle. But when I got to talking with them about incident and major incident and their change processes, it turned me off right away. I was very nervous at how they ran their shop. And you can learn a lot about how these Colo providers are ran by the level of incident and change management processes they use. And also be aware of inclement weather, how they function during inclement weather, especially if they're around inclement weather like the Southeast with hurricanes, the Northeast with ice storms and snowstorms. And also, of course, DR and BCP. And now there's a new one for those of you who haven't done this, pandemics. I currently have 2 Colos I'm in, and each provider has fairly different pandemic rules and regulations. It's interesting how that works, but so now it's not a bad idea to ask about items like that as well when you're in there. So key items I didn't have time to really cover a lot of time about. I'm just going to briefly mention here is professional movers. I highly recommend you do not try to move your data center yourself. I've moved 3 times now, and we've used professional movers every time. We're currently moving our main production data center shortly to a Colo, and I'm using actual Silverback. I know these guys really well, and I just highly recommend whoever you use, vet them really well, because like some of the Colo providers, you get what you pay for sometimes. So really vet your professional movers well. Another big one, and it can be a cost savings to your budget, is insurance when you move a data center. For example, you know, it may cost you $50,000, $200,000, depends on how big your data center is. You're going to move just for the insurance to move your hardware, and you have to be really careful about if your hardware is under warranty. Can you even move it out of that data center, or will you break the warranty on it? So you have to be careful about that. You also, your data center insurance on your data center, it may cover a move. You also may have an umbrella policy that can cover your move, and so you don't need that extra insurance. So always look at that. That can save you a lot of money. And one thing I recommend too is when you move to a data center Colo, is if you have any scheduled hardware you're going to retire and replace through end of life cycle, try to get that approved to go ahead and install that. We call it seed hardware at your new Colo site. Get it up there. That's less hardware you have to move, and you can already go ahead and you know, digitally transfer everything to that new hardware, and you don't have to move it. You can get it up and running. You can test your network. You can do anything, all that without even your first move. And then your moves themselves. Don't try to do too much at once. What I recommend is, like the first time I moved to a data center, we were very nervous. Even though we used professional movers and all, we were on our own project management team, and we did a two-move thing. And the first move was our non-production environments. So if we made any mistakes and it didn't work right, um, we had a little time and leadway to fix things. So those are some additional things you need to care about. In summary, uh, really important, 4 bullets. Visit sites, and visit sites again when they become your finalist. I think I had went to 8 sites originally, and they all kind of ran a little bit together. And when I get down to 3, I went again and visited 3. And then when I selected a site inside the MSA, I still went back to that site because now I've got to move. Have some sort of a data center model and strategy. This will help you so much in managing your current data center wherever it is, in a colo. If it's hybrid, it's colo, it's cloud, it's on-prem. That just helps you in so many ways to get that going. And think about what you're going to need in the future, because that's part of your strategy, I'm sure. But it's hard to really depend on everyone telling you, well, we don't expect but 5% growth. So if you have flexibility with a hybrid model like a colo and a cloud, you have, as well as on-prem, you have a lot of flexibility where you're not going to have to say no to anybody for installing hardware. And to me, the most important thing, and I'm an evangelist now for real estate brokers, I guess, but these guys are rock stars to me. Finally, I'll give you one quick example. I was about in the 11th hour, 95% finished negotiating with my 2 finalists for Colo about 10 years ago. And I thought I was I couldn't squeeze much more out of getting a better quote. And the real estate broker came in the 11th hour, and they got me another 20% discount, less than where I was at. Right away, that showed me. And then they also help you when you're renewing your contracts with your colo. For example, I've got a 3-year contract right now with one, and I'm about 9 months from it being up. But they just called me last week and said, "Hey, John, I just renegotiated 2 customers at the colo, and they're offering really good deals right now. And so I think you ought to jump on board now." And I'm going, well, I'm not sure. But then they also said, well, we don't want to wait till the last 2 or 3 months, because then it may be harder to do a better deal, because they know you don't want to have to move, and you only got 2 or 3 months to negotiate. So you're kind of losing your leverage. So they know the market, they know the industry, they know what everything is being priced at. And you can even look at some of the colo providers, and they say no real estate brokers. They'll still allow you to use real estate brokers, or everyone I have. If you would like more information about our organization, most of you know we're www.socal7x24exchange.com. And we'll also have the slide deck from this presentation there, as well as the video recording. So, and if you would like to become a sponsor, we really would appreciate getting some new sponsors. We do have costs for the website and when we have regular meetings.